So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to hire someone in Finland. This is a long-running series on my channel to do comparative human resources between Finland or the rest of the world and the United States. We look at different laws surrounding both the hiring and firing. And frankly, I do a lot of international human resources comparative stuff. So if you're interested in that, of course, please like and share. And subscribe because I do quite a bit. But today we're going to be talking about Finland. It's from this law firm, and I'm going to butcher it because I like doing that, but all apologies to my Finnish speakers. Kalliola Asiana Joto Isimisto Oi, and it's by those folks. Links down below if you want to read the whole thing. I only took excerpts so that you could see just a taste of what it's like to hire someone in Finland. So let's get off with background checks. There is, just like most of Europe and some of Southeast Asia, the background checks are regulated specifically surrounding protection of privacy and the control of privacy and information. Employers can only collect personal data from the employee or the applicant themselves, which is common sense, I suppose. But if they want to start going outwards, if they want to go to law firms and so forth, of course they have to have consent. And it's not required actually to get consent for credit data or criminal data, and there, which is kind of interesting. I mean, in the United States, I believe it's state by state, but in the United States, generally you get consent to do criminal record searches. Of course, they don't. If you don't provide it, you're not going to get hired. But they, generally speaking, you get consent, and it's interesting that in Finland you do not. In addition, there's a Security Clearance Act, and they use that to verify the reliability of applicants for work when it's talking about maintenance of infrastructure that is critical to the functioning of society. That's similar to a security clearance. In the military, but we don't really have this, for example, for building roads and bridges and things like that. As far as I'm aware, if you've seen a clearance, a security clearance for building, for example, a road or bridge, let me know. Uh, I think that again they have more general laws, but the United States seems to have more specific laws. So, for example, there is an act for doing a criminal background check for kids or for when you're supervising or working alone with kids. We have that in a lot of circumstances, and it's good liability protection, of course. But I'm not sure that we have specific federal regulations surrounding that. Similar to the United States, Finnish employers have the ability to do a medical exam as long as it's suitable for the work at hand. It's a little bit tricky in the United States. You can go outside the lines, but it's a really bad idea, meaning outside the bounds of the actual employment relationship. But it's a really bad idea when you start rejecting applicants based on that, based on going outside the lines, because it could open you up to both uh, to disability, ageism suits, and all sorts of other things that come along with that. However, what I find interesting is that the employer has to do this with a professional healthcare service provider. And I'm curious if they have in-house occupational staffs. That's somewhat common in the United States, especially at big manufacturers and big, chemical plants and things of that nature, as well as security. However, the idea of having being required to outsource it is pretty interesting. I'd like to know exactly what the difference there is between a professional healthcare service provider and whether or not, in-house occupational health would work. Drug testing is legal in Finland, but it has to be consistent with being chosen for a specific position, and it has to be, connected to the position where they need precision, reliability, independent judgment, or quick reactions. I am curious if this is abused. I mean, I can think of any number of American employers who would say, "Oh, yeah, being a janitor requires quick reaction because otherwise you might fall and hurt yourself," or something like that. So I'm curious, what the testing of it is and how actually strict it is. If an employee does have an alcohol problem, they can be sent for a checkup. There's no word on whether or not this checkup could mean that terminate the employee. And I'd like to be able to dig further into that to understand exactly the policy surrounding it after the checkup. I mean, are these employees drunk on the job, for example? There are rules against specific requests of hiring specific applicants to have personal characteristics that are unnecessary for the work at hand, which I think is kind of interesting. For example, you'll frequently see both, I know in Central America, specifically Mexico, as well as Northwest Europe, a request for the person to be a certain gender, or they'll say, for example, M/F. And so I'm curious how this squares against Finland, which is very clear that the job description or job advertisement can't include that sort of information. In much of the world, it actually calls it out, and that would come as a surprise to Americans that there is a specific information about gender on job applications. The written employment contracts in Finland are some of the longest I've ever seen, frankly. Meaning, what I mean by that is they have a lot of requirements. They need these essential terms in writing to include date of the commencement of work, trial period, place where work is performed, uh, a whole host of things that are basic. I would say they're very basic in their nature. They're not too unique. They're talking about the identity of the insurance institution receiving the pension contributions. If you compare this list, which I've done this discussion quite a few times, but if you compare this list to other ones, I would say it's normally like 5 or 6 things that are required in an employment contract. Of course, in the United States, there is no requirement of an employment contract whatsoever unless they're a contract employee. And even if they are a contract employee, there's not necessarily a contract. Um, there is a probationary period of maximum of 6 months. Of course, there is no rule with respect to that in the United States. There are no official probationary periods, but 6 months is quite long comparatively. For example, I think Japan is 1 month or 3 months. There are so many that are, no more than three. And so it's a little surprising that you can go up to six. There is allowances for people being away from work during a probationary period with respect to family and medical leave. In Finland, it seems that the legislation governing temporary staffing is mostly surrounding the labor unions. So, of course, you have to notify the labor union if you're going to use temporary agencies. If they are working, more than 10 days, you have to work with the union. And what's interesting is that you have to kind of notify that they are a partner in certain documents listed in the act on the contractor's obligation and liability when work is contracted out. So there's not the same regulations with respect to Southeast Asia, Africa, and much of the world with respect to temporary staffing. Again, in much of those countries, temporary staffing is very much a discussion surrounding like making sure that they're registered, et cetera, et cetera. This seems to be more focused on making sure that you're working in conjunction with the unions and treating the employees well. That's it for Finland today. Let me know what you think about this one. If you love these sort of breakdowns on international HR and international comparative laws, let me know, and like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye, guys.